Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Tanti Octavianti Juwita, and here I'm as the fourth presenter. Here I'd like to presentation about assessment, learning, and self-determination. Well, according to Journey 2001, the role of assessment in motivating students to learn can be traced to many theories of motivation. There are theories focusing on reasons for engagement in tasks and theories that focus on integrating expectancy and value contracts, and theories that integrate motivation and cognition. So, particularly fitting for the assessment context is self-determination theory or SDT, introduced by Ryan and Deci 2000. So this theory range from self-determined from of intrinsic motivation to control form of intrinsic motivation, and finally to a motivation that depending on degrees of self-determination itself. Then testing and assessment policies are mostly based on concept that rewards, punishment, and self-esteem based pressures are effective motivators for learning. So STT thus fits well in the assessment context. Ryan and Deci 2000 identify four types of motivation, from the most self-determined to the least self-determined, exactly: intrinsic motivation, self-determined extrinsic motivation, non-self-determined extrinsic motivation, and motivation. Well, so what is intrinsic motivation? Right, intrinsic motivation engaging behavior because it is personally rewarding, not for an external reward. So, intrinsic motivation refers to the stimulation that derives, adopting, or changing behavior for personal satisfaction or fulfillment. So such motivation drives an individual to perform an activity for internal reasons that are personally satisfying, as opposed to being motivated extrinsically, that is by the prospect of obtaining some external reward such as money. So intrinsic motivation refers to motivation that makes one feel engaged in an activity that is inherently interesting or enjoyable. So, if the assessment practices teachers employ make students feel learning is interesting and enjoyable, or make assessment real to students, then students will be intrinsically motivated. In other words, with intrinsic motivation, the incentive to engaging in a behavior or complementing a task is performing the task itself. And intrinsic motivation is derived from the direct relationship between the person and situation, or from intangible factors. One example of this is when someone writes a poem for their personal reading pleasure. So a person who sings and derives satisfaction out of singing is relying on intrinsic motivation. So let's move to extrinsic motivation. So what is it? Well, extrinsic motivation, that behavior is driven by external rewards such as money, fame, grades, and prize. So extrinsic motivation refers to motivation that is instrumental in nature. In other words, the activity is a means to end, but the requirement to engage in the activity is imposed to individual and may not even be something they feel like doing. So, Deci and Ryan view extensive motivations as a multidimensional construct as well. Well, according to Deci and Ryan 2000, there are three types of extrinsic motivation are divided into the self-determination theory tradition, including external regulation, introjections, and identification. Well, the first is external regulation. External regulation is the most representative type of extrinsic motivation. It refers to the involvement in activity to gain reward or to avoid punishment. Furthermore, behavior is the result of experiencing external or internal pressures. And the second type of extrinsic motivation is interjection. Well, refers to a more internalized involvement with an activity, one in which the self is more involved. So at this stage, behavior is not yet self-determined, but the individual is beginning to internalize this reason for her or his actions. The last, identification. Well, identification is a more self-determined type of extrinsic motivation that external regulation because behaviors are valued and considered important, and thus engagement is perceived as chosen by the individual itself. So integrated regulation refers to the most self-determined type of intrinsic motivation regarding internalization. At this level, behavior is still reformed for external reasons, although it is considered as part of self and goal-directed behaviors may be consistently pursued. So the absence of intrinsic reason is why behaviors that are the outcome of integrated regulation are not considered fully self-determined. Well, so let's move to self-determined extrinsic motivation. It is present when individuals participate in an activity voluntarily because they perceive the activity is valuable and important. It is extrinsic because the reason for participation is not within the activity itself, but it means to end. And at the same time, it is self-determined because the individual has experienced a sense of direction and purpose in acting. If assessment practices teachers employ make students feel their learning is an important part of the process for self-improvement, students may have self-determined extrinsic motivation to learn. So let's move to non-self-determined extrinsic motivation that occurs when the individual's behavior are regulated by external factors such as rewards, constraints, and punishment. This type of motivation is extrinsic because the reason individuals participate in this activity lies outside the activity itself. For example, family pressure. So that is, the behavior is not self-determined. Well, so individuals feel an obligation to engage and are regulated by external rewards, constraint on punishment. And if the assessment practices teachers employ make students feel that their learning is driven by external reward, yes, such as bonus mark in regarding or praise from teachers, students are non-self-determined, extrinsically motivated. Alright, the fourth dimension of motivation identified in STT is a motivation. This dimension refers for absence of contingency between one's action and outcomes. Motivated individuals do not seem to have specific purposes and goals, and they don't seem to approach ends in a system fashion. So a motivated individual simply do not demonstrate the instinct to engage in activity, and a motivation has been related to the learner helplessness, and where individual withdraw effort because of perception of incompetence, of loss of control. So the involvement in an activity is not a result of their will. Then, motivation is the absence of both intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. It is a state in which an individual lacks the intention to act. So, in this case, students may feel that they have no control over their action, or that to act is meaningless or without value or importance. One assessment fails to motivate students to learn either intrinsically or extrinsically. It is essentially a useless activity. Alright, Ryan and Dess's STTs categorize motivation along a continuum from self-determined form of intrinsic motivation to control form of intrinsic motivation, and finally to a motivation. They connect motivation to an individual's degrees of engagement. Testing and assessment policies are often based on the concept that rewards, punishment, and self-esteem based pressures are effective motivators for learning activity, help to account for complexity of individual perception of assessment, motivation, and learning. Well, that's all my presentation. Thank you for your nice attention. See you and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi